Cornell, to Mark's point about how Trump is never done trying to break things, in this case, our elections. Part of me wonders what would happen if he applied this to do good, right, to grow the economy or to eradicate measles, which was eradicated. But I digress. If he's not installing election deniers at local and statewide offices or trying to use his Justice Department to obtain voter data, he is perverting the United States Postal Service. And let me read you how some blue states are responding. California and other blue states warn of extreme risk in backing Trump election order. Quote, California and other Democratic-led states told the Supreme Court that granting the federal government's pending request for emergency relief on President Donald Trump's mail-in ballot EO would have extreme consequences ahead of the fall's midterms. They said that backing the administration would let the government rush out an unprecedented, legally indefensible voter verification and ballot interception program that would, among other things, give the U.S. Postal Service far-reaching new powers and responsibilities. Because of the high risk of errors and the limited window for correcting mistakes, many of the millions of voters who rely on mail voting would likely be denied mail ballots and as a result would be disenfranchised. It is amazing, the whole of government approach to disenfranchising voters and suppressing voters that they think won't vote for them. But I wonder if you can just speak to what you understand to be the sort of whole of government response from Democrats.
You know, I wish it weren't just from Democrats. The truth of the matter is we've got to have more Americans who want democracy. And look, that the post office could be determining elections is just insane. And Elon Musk knows this better than most. Like so many states, their primary way of voting is mail. I mean, go to Oregon and places out west where mail-in ballots is basically how they hold their elections. And you got to think at some point, and Nicole, we've talked about this before, but it's tough to do it on campaigns, right? Because, so much of the message is pollsters say, here's the top two messages, just talk about these two messages. And the message is always the economy. So we don't have these conversations more broadly from a campaign standpoint. But I at some point think Americans aren't as dumb as we think they are. I think Americans can hold multiple ideas in their heads, and we don't simply just have to talk to them 100% all the time about their pocketbook issues. I think they're smart enough to understand, okay, I have pocketbook concerns, but I also have concerns about holding my electeds and my government accountable. And if I lose that, if I lose the ability to hold our government and our elected officials accountable, the price I pay is far more higher than sort of the pocketbook prices that I'm paying and the next generation is paying. And I think that's a conversation that, yes, I want Democrats to have. But my God, Nicole, I want more Americans in the middle and on the left and the right to also want democracy.
Yeah, I mean, I see Jon Ossoff trying to make it a bigger conversation than a battle of two parties' policies coming to a head, placing this election in a broader frame. I think about...
And look at what he's doing, by the way. That should be
exactly
positive to others, that you can actually have this conversation and not lose.
Right. Well, I think about the Republicans who tried to stand up for democracy and they all lost their jobs. People like Liz Cheney and Adam Kinzinger. And I watch Cornyn with a feeble attempt to stand up to someone who is carrying out in public the most brazen perversion of the rule of law. And I think Cornyn was an attorney general or a prosecutor. I mean, what do you make of voters' growing fatigue, Cornell, with the fecklessness of Republicans who won't stand up to Trump on anything?
I think what I make of it is, and I think it was in the Fox poll a couple of weeks ago, is that Democrats now have the largest generic ballot advantage in their polling as they've ever seen. And I know we've had a lot of gerrymandering conversations, so we don't know how exactly the rigging of we're going to work out. But we need a broader mobilization, not to the left, but also in the middle among individual voters. And I think a lot of data points to that right now.
Mark, just give me your viewer's guide to what you're watching from a protecting democracy standpoint tonight.
So look, I think the most important thing that we have not talked about that I think goes to the protection of democracy tonight and in the future. And we talked here about the failings of the Republican Party. We've talked about how Democrats could talk about this more. But I want to pick up on something Michael said about the largest law firm being the Department of Justice. You know, I'm right now out there with my law firm. We're litigating 87 cases in 43 states. We are 60 lawyers. There was an article this weekend in the New York Times by Michael Schmidt about one big law firm, Paul Weiss. A law firm that, you know, if we were talking 4 years ago, we would be talking about the role of big law firms in standing up for democracy, not just in the big cases, but in a whole lot of little cases. And what this report showed is that this was a systematic decision by the leadership of Paul Weiss to turn away from its long history of doing work for democracy, of standing up against Donald Trump and his efforts to subvert it, and instead to put money and greed and profit above all of it. And this wasn't accidental, and it wasn't in one day, and it wasn't one person. It was just an institutional decision by this law firm to do this. And I think everyone in the legal industry needs to read that article. I think everyone in law school needs to read that article. But honestly, I think everyone at every large institution needs to ask whether they are, you know, fighting the fight, or whether they are a large institution maximizing profits. And because, you know, when I think about what voters will face today, it's a microcosm of what they're going to face in the fall. And if the large institutions of our government, the large corporations, the large media outlets, the large law firms, if they're not doing their part, like, yeah, the voters can hold these ideas, and we will do everything we can. But it will be with a lot fewer resources fighting those election deniers than we used to have.
Yeah, I'm familiar with that reporter and that story. And to me, the theme of that story is the theme of the collapse of the political party I was once a part of, and now will never support again because of its role in enabling authoritarianism in the United States of America. And I guess my thought in reading that piece is, for all of the people who make all those lawyers at that firm millionaires multiple times over and over and over and over again, I would ask all their corporate clients how many times in the history of the human race has appeasement worked out for the appeaser. Like, I'm just not sure it's a great bet for all their millions and billions of deals to bet on the appeasers, because the history of the human story suggests that the appeasers usually do not prevail in the end.